onto your butt.
Da-da-da. Oh, hello. Welcome to episode 166 of the Civil War Breakfast Club podcast. Once again, I'm joined by Mary, a woman who has accepted that her Cleveland Guardians days of Glorieta have passed. I am merely a faded bag of balls named Darren. Play ball, Mary. How we doing?
Bag of balls. Hey, this is the Guardians' year. We are finally going to end that drought.
You are red hot winners of one in a row.
We are.
They are a true.
We are going for it. We are going to break the drought.
Oh, absolutely.
1948 was the last time.
Not even a question. I bet the farm on that. How you doing? What's going on?
It's nice to be back recording again. I'm looking forward to recording this episode. This is one we've been talking about doing, I think, since we started this podcast, that we were going to get out to the Trans-Mississippi Theater, and that's exactly where we are headed tonight.
Well, not only has it been a while, Mary, but it's been a while since we've talked about a battle, if you think about it.
Yeah.
And the battle we're going to talk about tonight, it's relatively a small one when speaking to the total number of troops involved, but it's one that had gigantic ramifications of the overall war in the real Western theater, and that is the Battle of Glorieta Pass. The thing about this one is this battle doesn't have a lot of household names that we see fighting in Virginia or Tennessee. But what they lack in name recognition, they sort of make up for by being some of the more colorful characters in American history. But before we get too far, let's talk about the big question, which of course is, what are you drinking?
Well, I'm drinking Midwest IPA, which is from Great Lakes Brewing Company, which is, besides the Cleveland Guardians, another good thing to come out of Ohio. And we got this beer from our friend Todd, who very generously gave this to us along with a couple of old Civil War books. So thank you, Todd, for that.
Yeah, and since you drank all of Todd's beer, I am drinking Yingling because it's the local one. I'm drinking out of my Boston Red Sox mug because it's baseball season. We're going to talk about it. But getting back to this battle, what's fascinating about Glorieta Pass is this is one that was fought by raging alcoholics, pastors with anger issues, Native Americans, horsemen with lances, and even exploding mules.
Was there clowns or
there was everything.
Anti-beaver people?
Even Stefan from Saturday Night Live could not make Glorieta Pass more appealing than it already is, okay? It just is. But before we get into this battle, as usual, we have to turn back time.
If I could turn back time.
And explain how they got there and why this battle is so important, in the big picture. So it starts with annexation of Texas going back to 1845, which resulted in the Mexican War, which of course was won by the United States. Almost like the baseball, but not really.
Yep.
But 1848 treaty that ended the war was the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and it gave the United States 500,000 square miles from the defeated, country of Mexico. 5 years later, in 1853, the Gadsden Purchase is going to give the U.S. just about 30,000 more acres. And when they bought the land for $10 million from Mexico, and it established basically the final southern border in modern-day Arizona, in New Mexico. Ironically, the arrangement of the Gadsden Purchase, that was helped by President Franklin Pierce, as Secretary of War, his close friend was, guess who?
Jefferson Davis.
Jefferson Davis. There you go. So with this one. But the purchase settled that ongoing, basically, border dispute that was with Mexico that gave the U.S. more land, especially for things like the future railroad, right? These two land acquisitions would allow for present states of California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, and parts of Colorado and Wyoming. One fun fact, by the way, is after the Gadsden Purchase was complete, Jefferson Davis, he arranged to import 74 camels to the newly Southwest from North Africa to see how useful they would be in this new acquired American desert territory.
For a second, I thought you said Campbell's, and I was like, why is he importing soup?
Oh, maybe he did. Probably could use it later on anyway. But anyways, when the secession crisis boiled over and the Civil War began in April of 1861, the national focus was understandably on the Eastern Theater, particularly Virginia, right?
Yep.
As it was. But back in Texas, one man saw an opportunity here for a huge land grab, for the Confederacy, and that was one Henry Hopkins Sibley. Knowing that a conquest of the new western states meant further territory, it also meant seizing the gold and silver fields in California and Colorado, also controlling the Pacific Ocean ports of Los Angeles and San Francisco, which were both free of Winfield Scott's blockade. They weren't blockaded.
This is a way for them to get,
right,
obviously around that blockade to get stuff to them. Now, mind you, it's going to be a long route.
It
I
is.
don't know if they thought out that as much.
Not. But Sibley is going to go to Richmond eventually, and he's going to meet with Jefferson Davis, who was the Confederate president, Mary, in case you didn't know that, with this plan. Now, real quick on Sibley. Henry Hopkins Sibley was born on May 25th of 1818 in Nacogdoches, Louisiana, to Samuel and Mary Sibley, who was also the grandson of John Sibley, a doctor from beautiful Worcester, Massachusetts, who worked as a surgeon in the Revolutionary War. Henry's father dies when he's 7, and he and his mother are going to move to St. Charles, Missouri, where he will grow up, and eventually he'll attend the University of Miami and Oxford, Ohio, the Red Hawks.
Yep.
Henry eventually moved back to Louisiana to live with her grandfather, Dr. John Sibley, who was then a member of the Louisiana State Senate. Now, Dr. Sibley, this is the grandfather now, he's going to help get Henry a commission to West Point, where he's going to finish 31st in the class of 1838, joining future Civil War classmates, Pierre Gustave Dutton Beauregard, William Hardy, Irvin McDowell, right? So it's a pretty good class. After graduation, Sibley will become a second lieutenant with the 2nd U.S. Dragoons, which is mounted rifles, in the Second Seminole War down in Florida. He'll go to Mexico, he'll fight at Cerro Gordo, he'll fight in Contreras. He is promoted to captain of Company I of the 2nd Dragoons. From 1850 to 54, Sibley was stationed on the Texas frontier at Fort Graham, where he got an idea for a 12-man tent that would eventually be known as what?
The Sibley tent.
The Sibley tent. A very creative, Mary. Sibley also spent time in Kansas during Bleeding Kansas, fighting in 1857, was part of that Utah expedition.
Yeah, with Albert Sidney Johnston,
Whitfield Scott Hancock, all of them, right? It's around this time that he gets the taste of alcohol for the first time, and it's going to catch up with him.
He looks like it does catch up with him.
And just like you, Mary, Sibley liked to drink and drink a lot. And just like you, when he drank, he tended to get really angry and judgmental, okay?
Don't.
But if he were alive today, Mary, he'd probably post late-night Facebook posts that he'd delete the next morning. That's the type of guy he was, when he sobered up. That's who he was. One time he got in a drunken fight with his regimental commander, Philip St. George Cook. Perhaps you've heard of him.
Was it over the Super Bowl?
Who knows? But he ended up getting court-martialed for fighting his regimental commander. Cook, of course, is better known in Civil War circles as who? The father-in-law of Jeb Stuart.
Oh, right.
There we go, right? Small world.
He will regret that once for the rest of his life or whatever it was.
Regret it once, it'll be continuously. But in 1860, Sibley is going to be sent to the New Mexico Territory to fight the Navajos, where he was stationed at Fort Union, which is going to be a place that he knew very, very well, and one that he'd look at to take advantage of later on that we'll talk about. Mm-hmm. Sibley knew the New Mexico Territory well, and in early July of 1861, he's going to decide, like I said, to travel to Richmond to pitch his plan to President Jefferson Davis. And if you know anything about business, Mary, and obviously you don't, you know it's important that whenever you have a meeting with the big boss, you know exactly how he's going to react to your sales pitch, right? That's kind of how it works. Sibley knew that Davis wanted to expand Confederate territory west to expand slavery. Yeah. So when he visited Richmond, he asked permission to raise a brigade of 3 Texas regiments, all mounted volunteers, where he would invade New Mexico, which he knew was lightly defended by the Federal Army. Again, most of the focus is on the east at this point. Mm-hmm. This raid would allow him to capture the Union forts along the Rio Grande River, and until they reached the town of Santa Fe, where they would then target his old fort, Fort Union. His army, in his mind, would live off the land, and they'd be greeted as heroes by the local New Mexico population because he thought they were pro-Southern. Mm-hmm. He'll find out later that it's not so much the case. No. After taking Fort Union, this is his plan, he then marched to Colorado and then California to take the gold and silver fields and then secure the ports of Los Angeles and San Francisco, where the Rebs could enjoy those ports, like we said, that were free of the naval blockade. Obviously, Davis loved the plan. He was totally okay with it.
I mean, Davis liked anything on paper.
What?
Like Davis, he liked anything on paper. He was like, "Yeah, sure, let's do it. It sounds good." Without even thinking what could possibly happen.
This one was one right. It was selling on his side of the street here. This is what he wanted. But Davis okays it, but with the understanding that Richmond could not supply him any men nor any supplies. They could not spare a square, right?
Yep.
In Virginia. The Confederate president then named Sibley a brigadier general and named him commander of the new created Department of New Mexico. Now, again, Texas in 1861 had been in flux since it seceded on February 1st of 1861.
Well, wasn't there debate over whether they should secede? Like, wasn't not Daniel Boone?
Well, it was Houston. It was Houston.
Yeah, Sam Houston.
Right. But that was a whole mess. The federal armories in San Antonio were under the command of David Twiggs. We've talked about him in the past. Mm-hmm. He's 71 years old. He's a southern-leaning Union commander from Richmond County, Georgia, who had the nickname of Bengal Tiger, of all things, right? But here's the thing, though. Twiggs was the 5th highest ranking officer in the United States Army at that point, behind Winfield Scott, John Wool, Joseph E. Johnston, and William Harney, right? So he was kind of a big dog. When Texas seceded, Twiggs refused to fire on fellow Americans, so he surrendered the Texas forts and arsenals, without a fight. He handed the Texans 20 forts, 44 cannon, 2,000 muskets, 24 Dunkin' Donuts franchises, 500 wagons, and 950 horses, a prize package worth $1.3 million in 1861.
How many DQs?
He didn't say that. It was early. But that comes out to $51 million today. That's how much he gave away.
Wow.
As soon as Twiggs gave away the store, he then immediately asked to be relieved of his command on May 22nd. And then what does he do? He joins the Confederacy as a general.
As one does.
Commanding the Department of Louisiana. But, wait, there's more. He's going to get sick and die like a year later in Georgia. So he doesn't stick around. But while Sibley is putting his army together, there's already a battalion under the command of John R. Baylor called the 2nd Texas Mounted Rifles preparing, their own raid. Baylor wanted to have a similar idea of what Sibley wanted to do. Baylor was from Kentucky, and he YOLO'd his 350 men to El Paso, Texas, where he took the surrender on July 25th of 1861 of the Union Fort Bliss, 380 Union troops under Major Isaac Lind, and all of its supplies, including 4 artillery pieces. The commander of the Confederate Department of Texas, old friend, guess who? Earl Van Dorn, right?
Oh, right, EVD.
Right. He gave Baylor permission to invade New Mexico and attack Fort Fillmore, which had been abandoned earlier, so it's kind of like discovering land that no one's there. But on August 1st of 1861, Baylor declares this territory as the Confederate States of Arizona, with its capital in Mesilla, New Mexico. Oh, and by the way, he names himself its first governor, which Jefferson Davis was like, okay, knock yourself out.
Can't believe he was okay with that.
Well, but Baylor's area of control was actually quite small. He had a hard time expanding it because he only had like 350 guys. And he was exposed to potential attacks by Native Americans, plus any Union advance that was in the area. Davis is going to later regret this decision because Baylor was kind of a wacko. He ordered his men to slaughter all the Apache in the area, and Davis is like, no. And so he removed him from office, and that was the end of Baylor. This is not the guy, by the way, Baylor University is named after.
I would hope not.
It was not. But here's the thing, though. While Baylor was setting up his shop in New Mexico, Sibley was in San Antonio, and he was recruiting. And by September of 1861, Sibley had recruited 1,100 guys. He's going to march now to El Paso. This is the area that near Baylor where he was, knowing that their supplies would have to come almost exclusively from captured U.S. forts. Because remember, Richmond wasn't going to send them anything.
No.
And the land there is not exactly full of DQs and restaurants, right? It's not like it is today. It's pretty much a wasteland. Federal presence in the territory was also small, since most of the war had pulled troops to the Eastern Theater. Mm-hmm. And most U.S. forts were stripped of supplies, and the only forts that were really deemed necessary were held, which gave Native Americans an opportunity to attack and seize the region. Yep. A lot of stuff happened at that point. But even with this small presence, the Union still controlled most of the territory around the valley of the Rio Grande River.
Yeah.
The federal command of the territory was held by Colonel Edward Canby.
and he was headquartered at Fort Craig. And he's got 5 regiments of New Mexico volunteers with him, a company of 2nd Colorado Infantry, 2 provisional artillery units, 11 companies of the 5th, 7th, and 10th U.S. Infantry, 6 companies of 2nd and 3rd U.S. Cavalry, and 2 regiments of New Mexico Militia. And that's the thing about the Battle of Glorieta Pass, is it is not like Antietam or Gettysburg or Chickamauga where you have like a corps and divisions and all that. It's very cut up compared to that.
Yeah, this is not a traditional battle like you'd see, but Canby, he was born November 9th, 1817 in Piatt's Landing, Kentucky, to a local doctor, Israel Canby, and his wife, Elizabeth. The family is going to move to Indiana, and Edward is going to attend Wabash College before enrolling in that star-studded West Point class of 1839, along with Louis Armistead, Henry Halleck, Henry Hunt, Edward Ord, James Ricketts, and of course the great Isaac Stevens, right? He'll fight in the Second Seminole War as a lieutenant from 1848 to 55, and he's going to hold staff posts on the West Coast, right? When the Civil War breaks out, he was colonel of the 19th United States Regulars. He'll be sent to Fort Defiance in the New Mexico Territory, and he was named commander of the Department of New Mexico, replacing, guess who? William Loring, who resigned to join the Confederacy. It's funny how it's such a small world with some of these people, you know?
Yeah, well, they all know each other.
Right. Canby's going to command 3,800 men, like you said, at Fort Craig, near modern-day Scirocco, New Mexico, and he was on the west side of the Rio Grande River at El Camino Real de Terra ad Ontario, which translates to "Beware of the Bang Barn." No, it's the Royal Road of the Interior. If you really want to study your Spanish,
it sounded like you said Ontario there for a second.
Oh no, it's not that big.
Beware of the Bang Barn.
But Fort Craig was the largest fort in the Southwest, 15 acres, and named for a Captain Lewis Craig, who was murdered by a deserter in California in 1852. The overall condition of life at Fort Craig was horrible. Leaky roof, overcrowded. The men were forced to watch Baltimore Oriole games. I mean, just imagine how miserable that must have been. Fort Craig was the perfect location to block, though, any potential Confederate movements north along the Rio Grande. It was a perfectly situated fort. And like you said a minute ago, a third of Canby's men were United States regulars, and the rest were made up of inexperienced volunteers and militiamen who would basically find themselves right in the path of Henry Sibley's march up the river towards Santa Fe, right?
Yep.
Canby and Sibley, they knew each other quite well. Again, from the It's a Small World department, Canby was Sibley's best man at his wedding in 1840.
That's kind of like, who was it? Was it Longstreet was Grant's best man at his wedding?
It's like a big incestuous world with this, but these were. But by October of 1861, Sibley, though, had his plan of attack done. He was a prepared fella. He's going to conquer the Union-controlled New Mexico territory by moving up the Rio Grande, take the supplies at Fort Union, the very fort again he was stationed at before the war, and one that he thought he knew like the back of his hand. So he has an ace in the hole. I know the fort. I know its weaknesses. I know how to defeat it. I'm going to take my supplies. If I can get the supplies from Fort Union, I can supply my army for 3 whole months as I go to California.
Yeah.
That's kind of what it was. At this point, he'll gather all the food, the water, everything that a growing boy needs to go on this march, right? If necessary, if he ran a little bit low, needed a cup of sugar, he would just simply go to the local population, who he was positive were going to be Southern sympathizers. Not so much. When Sibley's army arrived in Mesilla in New Mexico in late December, which is just over the Texas border, he is going to issue a proclamation to the locals on December 20th, 1861, and it read, and I quote, "Those who cooperate with the enemy will be treated accordingly and must be prepared to share their fate. XOXO Henry Sibley, CSA." So he's basically, in one hand, promising the locals security from rebel looters, and they would pay for any supplies, but also you'll be punished if you help the Union Army in this area at all. Naturally, Sibley's troops stole supplies from locals almost immediately, and they quickly discovered the New Mexico population was very hostile towards these Southerners and would openly ignore his threat and offered him no help whatsoever.
I'd be hostile too.
They did not like them one bit. They were actually pro-Union, and somehow he completely misread this. And The population's loyalties are, again, very pro-Union. He got no sympathy for his hungry or thirsty men on this campaign. And this is going to be a problem later. It's going to be a problem, Mary, right? By February of 1862, Sibley and Baylor, his 2nd Texas Mounted Rifles, they'd consolidated their forces. Now, this is Baylor, the one who came out there earlier, right? And they all marched together north in the sleet and cold. Remember, it's the winter of 62 in New Mexico. It's not like it's not Miami Beach here, Mary, right? And their first target is going to be Canby's Fort Craig, where Sibley planned to supply his army after capturing the fort. In his mind, this is like stopping a 95 to get gas. We're going to hit the fort, wipe these guys out. We're going to get their support and their supplies, and we're going to head to Fort Union. This was just a stop along the way. And you mentioned a while ago the Union. Sibley's brigade had 4 regiments, including the 2nd Texas Mounted Rifles under Charles Pyron, the 4th Texas Mounted Rifles under William Scurry, the 7th Texas Mounted Rifles under John Sutton, and the 5th Texas Mounted Rifles under Tom Green, which is obviously before he appeared on Punk'd and Jackass. This is way before, okay?
Did you say the 7th Texas?
7th Texas, you got it. Sibley also had 4 mounted howitzers that he liberated from the San Antonio arsenal, courtesy of David Twiggs, who probably gift-wrapped him probably. He also had 6 companies from Baylor's army under the command of, like I said, Major Charles Pyron, and whose men were literally gamblers, gunslingers, other Wild West types looked like extras from Blazing Saddles, right? that he had recruited in Mesilla, New Mexico, as well as a few artillery pieces. Again, we're not talking about the traditional Confederate army.
No.
Just think of Wyatt Earp movies. Think of Blazing Saddles.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Is like these guys who were in the if you think the Wyatt Earp movie with Kevin Costner, like that type of people is who's out here. This is truly like, as much as we joke around that the Western Theater, meaning Chickamauga and all that, is the land of misfit toys. This Western Theater, even further west, is even more. It's the misfits are definitely
these
out
are all
here.
desperado people. That's who they are. Sibley's convoy had a total of 2,500 men. Some wore civilian clothes. Others had federal uniforms they had gotten from the Union forts. They were armed with squirrel guns, double-barrel shotguns. It was a complete yard sale of dirty and sweaty humanity is what this thing was, right?
Yard sale.
Right. They also had 15 artillery pieces, a supply train, and a herd of cattle. So you can just imagine this army, right?
They almost sound like they're Sherman's bummers if they were put into an army.
Yeah, probably.
And just Sherman's bummers.
But probably, maybe a little bit different. But in the Union side, inside Fort Craig, Canby had 3,810 troops and 2 guns made up of regulars and volunteers. One of the regiments, mostly of Hispanic men, was from the 1st New Mexico, was commanded by none other than Christopher Kit Carson, the famous Western frontierman. Maybe you've heard of him.
I have.
Maybe you haven't. But on February 19th, 1862, Sibley's army is going to arrive near Fort Craig, and he thought that he would encircle it and he would take it with a direct assault, hoping he would draw Canby's men out to fight on ground of Sibley's choosing. But Canby reacted the next day by sneaking troops out of the fort and sending them north along the Rio Grande River to block his advance to Santa Fe and then do any damage he could. On February 20th, Sibley at that moment was on a mesa near the town of Valverde, New Mexico, when those men from Canby's army approached from Fort Craig. What will occur next will be known as a Battle of Valverde, or Battle of Valverde Ford, if you're nasty, right? Now, we're not going to talk in the details of this, because maybe we'll do a whole episode on this one.
We probably should.
It's kind of fun. But one highlight was during the night of February 20th, Union Captain James Graydon, he was a hotel manager and saloon keeper, got a great idea on how he could break the rebel line. Graydon would load boxes full of 24-pound howitzer shells onto the backs of mules and lead them to the Confederate camp at Valverde, where they'd explode and kill the rebels in the camp. Sounds like no chance this goes wrong.
That sounds like such a good plan.
So he and a few of his men are going to quietly lead 2 mules carrying these explosives to the rebel camp. They're going to light the fuses, slap the mules on the butt, and make them run into the Confederate camp. And then they're going to run off. It's going to blow up, and that's going to be the end. But the problem came when the mules turned and began to run after Graydon's men, who probably thought they were being abandoned. So
you're going to go with who feeds you.
right. So the Union troops, it's got comedy of errors. Now they're trying to outrun the mules while the fuse is burning, getting ready to explode, trying to get the hell out of the difference before these things blow up. And of course, it blows up. The mules get blown up to hell, nowhere near the rebel camp, and the plan's a complete failure. But to add insult to injury, the other mules they had ridden to camp with, upon hearing the explosion, scattered, ran into the darkness, never to be seen again. So they lost everything.
God. I mean, it reminds me of, just Dr. Malcolm in Jurassic Park. It's like you got so caught up in realizing you could do it, and I'm paraphrasing, that you realized you shouldn't do it, kind of thing.
Well, it's just typical of the whole
Or that you
thing.
didn't realize you shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
And life finds a way.
February 21st, Canby is going to send 700 more men to Valverde, including Kit Carson's 1st New Mexico, and all went basically back for Sibley, right? Sibley himself had to leave the battlefield because reportedly during the Battle of Valverde, he was too hungover after a call me maybe night of drinking whiskey. He had to turn command over to Colonel Tom Green, that commander I mentioned before of the 5th Texas Mounted Rifles. He's going to lead a cavalry charge with 40 Lancers on horseback versus the Colorado Volunteers. 37 of the 40 Lancers are going to be killed or wounded in what will be the only time mounted men with lances were used in the entire Civil War.
Wow.
Just imagine this whole thing. Green's going to survive, but he'll die on April 12th of 64 during the Red River Campaign when he's sitting on a boat and a shell from a federal gunboat blows him up, basically.
Wow.
But the Battle of Valverde was technically a Confederate victory as Sibley held the field, but when it was over, it was a rebel loss, in the big picture. I mean, they only lost like 7% of their men, like 187 guys, but they failed to take Fort Craig and its supplies. And Canby knew that to hold the region, he could not lose this fort. Also more important, time was running out on Sibley, who was in the cold with food and water quickly disappearing and no way of resupplying.
Yeah.
Right?
And this Battle of Valverde is going to become part of this campaign that is fought from February to April of 1862 called the New Mexico Campaign. And keep in mind, this is happening before Shiloh.
Yeah.
As well.
Sibley actually tried to demand Canby to surrender the fort to Fort Craig. And of course, Canby's like, no, I'm not gonna do this, because he knew the Rebs don't have enough men to take the fort. They don't have enough artillery, and they also knew they could not sustain a siege in the fort because their supplies were going to run out.
Yeah.
So Canby's just going to wait him out. So knowing he could not take the fort, Sibley is going to roll the dice and do something very dangerous. He's going to move north along the Rio Grande, basically putting himself between the 3,000-man federal garrison and the Union-held Fort Union in his front. He's going to leave a large enemy in his rear. It's something that Lee would never do at Harper's Ferry. That was exactly what he did, but he had no choice. But by doing this and not getting the supplies from Fort Craig, he knew he's going to have to live off the land, and there'd be no supplies coming out of the fort. So he put his army on the move away from Fort Craig, leaving behind just a handful of men to keep an eye on it. But all the food and supplies they counted on, they were walking away from. Now, Canby didn't exactly sit around knowing, he didn't just sit around doing nothing either, knowing Sibley had moved on. After the Battle of Valverde, he had sent those troops I mentioned earlier north to keep an eye on Sibley, but also to destroy any supplies along the way in his path that Sibley's army could use. Canby knew that he was running low on supplies, so he sends men north to basically to destroy any food or supplies they could possibly do along this battle, along this battlefront here. Sibley's next destinations are going to be the towns of Albuquerque and Santa Fe, like I mentioned before, where he anticipated he could find enough supplies to sustain his army for a while. But when he arrived in Albuquerque, guess what? He discovered Canby's men had beat them there and burned all the supplies.
Wow, good for them.
4 days later, on March 5th, he arrived in Santa Fe to find the same thing had happened. The Union got there first and burnt everything.
He must have been livid.
Well, I'm sure he was. By now, Sibley had a major problem and the need for supplies, especially food, was getting urgent. You're in the middle of nowhere. You're in a desert area. There's no farms anywhere.
Your horse has no name.
Right, exactly. And the only food that you thought you were going to get, you thought it'd be a milk run to go into these forts because the other ones had all surrendered quickly. But now you're stuck in the middle. Throw in the fact that the locals are hostile to the Rebs as well. So it's not like they're going to be able to get anything. They're 60 miles away from Fort Union at this point, and where their next hope of supplies was. So just imagine, you're cruising
miserable.
on E and the gas station's 60 miles away. Yeah. That's kind of where they were with this, right? Sibley did know, though, that if he, like I said before, if he did take Fort Union and got those supplies, the road to California was wide open for him. And he felt confident that he could do it since, he was stationed at that fort before. And like I said, he knew what the weaknesses. We're going to take the fort, and we're good. But unfortunately for Sibley, two things that he did not know are about to become a huge problem. First, Fort Union had been enhanced substantially since he was last there. It now has stronger defenses. And more important, the second thing, for the most part, was Union troop reinforcements were on the way. Colorado's governor, a guy named Lewis Weld, he had ordered troops to travel to Fort Union to help its defense. 1,342 men are going to travel 400 miles in 13 days, in some places through waist-deep snow, to get to the fort in time to defend against Sibley. These reinforcements were commanded by a lawyer from Denver named John B. Slough, and they would arrive at Fort Union on March 11th.
Yep.
Now, Slough's men, they're from the 1st Colorado, and they were rowdy partiers who immediately got to the fort and raided the sutler stores, just took everything. Slough was sitting there basically babysitting these guys for 11 days at Fort Union. And then he realizes, I got to get these guys out of here. I got to get keep them busy because they're basically menaces, all of them.
And I mean, Slough's got interesting history too. He's a lawyer born in Cincinnati, Ohio, educated at Cincinnati Law School, where he practiced law before being elected to the Ohio General Assembly. And then he got into the Civil War service, but he's going to be involved in Bleeding Kansas as well.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk more about him as we go with this, but he's definitely an interesting fellow, no question about that. So basically, what Slough is going to do is to keep these guys busy. On March 22nd, he's going to begin to march them to a place called Bernal Springs with all 1,342 men plus 2 4-gun batteries along the Santa Fe Trail, which he was heading right towards the Confederates. Slough had been sent to reinforce and support Canby, but for whatever reason, Canby did not know he was coming, and he'd actually ordered Colonel Gabriel Paul of Gettysburg's first day fame here to hold Fort Union until Canby himself arrived. But so when Slough arrived, it was kind of total surprise. The Rebs, mostly Baylor's men, plus a little artillery, were also on the move, and they were heading east under Charles Pyron towards Fort Union. Unbeknownst to them, they were on a collision course with Slough's approaching regiment, who was moving west on the same road and was encamped in the town of Loma, New Mexico. Now, while in camp, Slough orders 418 men under Major John Chivington ahead to raid Santa Fe and clear out any Rebs he found there. So now we have to talk about John Chivington for a minute, who is possibly the most colorful person we've probably ever discussed on this podcast.
He looks like a very colorful person.
John Milton Chivington was born in Lebanon, Ohio, and was a hardcore abolitionist as well as a Methodist minister. Before the war in 1846, he was a Freemason in Butlerville, Ohio. He became the first master of a lodge in the state of Kansas. From there, he became a grand chaplain in the territory of New Mexico in Freemasonry. Chivington was a hot-tempered, angry fella, 6'4", 260 pounds. Every ounce in his body hated Native Americans to a fanatical level. Just hated them, right?
Wow.
He turned down a commission as an Army chaplain because he wanted to fight. And he said at the time, quote, "I must respectfully decline an appointment as a non-combatant officer and request a fighting commission instead." He earned the nickname the Fighting Parson.
Right.
right?
Well, historian James Haynes said of Chivington, Mr. Chivington was not as steady in his demeanor as becomes a man called to God, of God to work of the ministry, giving his ministerial friends regret and even trouble in their efforts to sustain his reputation. So he's like, oh, yes, I'm a God-fearing man, but also F you.
During the journey from Denver to Fort Union, Chivington and Slough fought like brothers stuck in a car too long. Slough said after this battle, okay, the quote he says was, quote, half the regiment had gone off to hell with a crazy preacher who thinks he's Napoleon Bonaparte. That's the quote he said.
Jeez.
Chivington was a colonel of the 1st Colorado Cavalry, and he commanded the 1st Battalion of U.S. Regulars, the 5th U.S. Cavalry Company G, as well as the 1st Colorado Company B, plus some volunteers from New Mexico and Colorado. He also commanded the 2nd Battalion, the 1st Colorado Companies A, B, E, and H. But before we go on to what he does in the Santa Fe Trail, I just want to talk a little more about Chivington, just because. A few years after this battle on November 29th, 1864, remember I said he doesn't like Native Americans.
Yeah.
He led 1,000 militiamen against 700 Arapaho and Cheyenne in Sandy Creek, Colorado, who were commanded by a chief named Black Kettle. Black Kettle had surrendered to Chivington, but Chivington ignored it. That night, while the whole tribe was sleeping, he killed all of them. 150 men, women, and children while they slept in what will be called the Sand Creek Massacre.
Chivington did that?
But wait, there's more,
shit.
as the ShamWow guy says. After he killed them, he cut them up, took their body parts back to Denver, and displayed them on the city streets as souvenirs. He was never punished for this, but one man who was there said afterwards, Colonel Chivington ought to be tried by court-martial and shot like a wolf.
Yeah.
After the war in 1866, his son Thomas drowned while swimming, and his body was never recovered, leaving behind his heartbroken young wife named Sarah. So what does John Chivington do? He marries her. He marries
that's so wrong.
He marries his son's widow, despite being 20 years older than her, in an act that horrified his family so bad they actually tried to have him arrested. That's how bad it was.
That is...
2 years later, in March of 1869, he lit his own house on fire to get insurance money, then left Sarah in 1873 when she accused him of beating her. He remarried less than a year later to a woman named Isabel Carr. He died on October 4th, 1894, at age 73. He was getting a full Masonic funeral when no one was allowed to say a bad thing about him, and all of his misdeeds in life went ignored. I say all this because this is the guy who's about to play a large part in the battle we're going to talk about. Just give you a mindset into his psychology. That's who we're talking about here.
He's a psycho.
John Chivington was a wild man, and he was a fighting parson. Okay, so
Before you said set his house on fire, I thought you were going to say he set himself on fire. And I'm like, this is how this guy goes out.
But he's a fascinating study. 6'4", 260. I mean, just didn't like Native Americans, anything. This is who we're talking about in this whole battle. The people like this. Wednesday, March 26, 1862, Chivington and his 418 men, they're going to arrive in Santa Fe, and they're going to approach a steepy, rocky gorge along the Santa Fe Trail called Glorieta Pass at the beginning of Apache Canyon. He will set up his camp in a place called Kozlowski's Ranch, which was close to the rebel picket line, so close they could actually see and hear them. Advancing towards them were 300 men of the 2nd Texas Mounted Rifles, again under Charles Pyron, who was moving forward towards Fort Union, who had camped basically back at a place called Johnson's Ranch at the beginning of the canyon. So you have two armies approaching each other in a canyon on the same dirt road. Here it was. Here, Chivington ran into the first elements of Pyron's advancing Confederates. Now, Chivington immediately ordered his men up the steep slope of the canyon, which forced Pyron to fall back into the narrow gorge, where he's going to set up his artillery fire after capturing Pyron's entire picket line. Now, again, Chivington eventually drove Pyron's troops back, and he's 6'4", 260. The colonel, he rode up on his horse with a pistol in each hand and two more in his holsters. One of his men said Chivington was, quote, looking like a mad bull. Now, Pyron only had 300 men from his 2nd Texas Mounted Rifles, and soon both sides were blasting away at each other. And
They're just blasting away?
Blasting away in what will be known as the Battle of Glorieta Pass. Now, Chivington split up his regiment and put them on both sides of a slope, and soon Pyron started to fall back down the canyon again towards the rebel reinforcements that he was hoping were on the way, because he did not anticipate this. They literally met on the march. The Federals literally chased Pyron down Apache Canyon all the way back to their camp at Johnson's Ranch. Before they got back, Chivington had captured 25% of Pyron's men before ordering a full withdrawal himself to rest his men and horses and to secure all those prisoners they got.
Yeah.
And they fell back to their camp back at Kozlowski's ranch. Now, again, with both sides basically falling back to their respective camps, the Battle of Glorieta Pass wasn't a very huge one at this point, but both knew where the enemy was and how close they were to each other as darkness fell on the 26th. So it's kind of like the night for Antietam.
Yeah.
They have a quick little skirmish, but they know there's going to be a battle coming up the next day.
Yeah.
Well, that's so they thought. That night, Pyron is going to call for reinforcements, and he's going to call, and Sibley is going to send up the 4th Texas Mounted Rifles, as well as a battalion of the 7th Texas Mounted Rifles under the command of Lieutenant William Scurry, who rode all night to get to Pyron. They'll get there at Johnson's Ranch about 3 o'clock in the morning on the 27th, and since Scurry was the senior officer, he assumed command of the field and all the Confederates in the area, who now had about 1,000 guys.
Yep.
So the next day, Chivington, for whatever reason, chose not to attack. So both sides prepared for the expected battle now that was going to take place on the following day, the 28th. So the 27th, nothing really happens.
We are recording on the anniversary.
That is correct, on the anniversary.
Yep.
So on the 28th, Scurry decided to seize the initiative here and not wait for Chivington to attack. So what does he do? He begins to head back into Apache Canyon, but here's what he does wrong. He chooses to leave his supply train back at camp at Johnson's Ranch. Now, Chivington had actually fallen all the way back to join Slough's main line when he learned that Scurry was on the move towards them through the canyon. So Slough decides to split his command into 2 columns, and knowing Chivington had success 2 days earlier, decided to move forward down that Santa Fe Trail again towards the Confederates. His 850 men would move forward as the main column, while Chivington's 400 men would be used as a flanking column and march west through the mountains and get behind Scurry's army. So you see what's going on here?
Yep.
You've got 850 men going down the main road. He's going to send, like Longstreet to Gettysburg, he's going to send him on his flank to get behind the army. But there's a problem, Mary. There's a problem.
There's always a problem.
The problem is there's mountains here, okay? And there's no real paths. So Chivington, he'd never been there before. He doesn't know where he's going. But he gets lucky here. Chivington had a huge advantage in that he had a man with him in his army named Lieutenant Colonel Manuel Antonio Chavez of the 2nd New Mexico Volunteers. Chavez just happened to be a local to the area, and he knew the way through the mountains. So he unexpectedly got an invaluable scout for his army that's going to lead them through the mountains to get behind Scurry and get to Johnson's Ranch. So Chivington's flanking column, they're going to get a stepping with those 400-plus men, led by Chavez, and away they went looking to get behind Scurry's and Pyron's lines.
Yep.
Okay. Chivington's column is going to get to the high ground above Johnson's Ranch in the early afternoon. They're going to get there on the 28th, and from the ridge, got a perfect view of the Confederate camp. In their camp was Scurry's vital supply train that he had kept far in the back to protect it from the Union troops, and when Chivington looked closer, he noticed it was only being guarded by 200 men. Now, this is his lifeblood. This is the supply wagon. Without them, they're SOL and JWF, right? That's what they're going to be. But here's the thing. Those 200 Confederates guarding it, you know why Scurry left them to protect the wagons? Because these men were too sick to fight in the battle. So he left sick men to guard the vital supply wagons. Because the last thing Scurry thought was the Union Army was going to somehow get through the mountains and get around his savannah and attack his wagons because he assumed they were completely safe. I mean, why wouldn't he? It would take a miracle for Shivington or anybody to get there, because they have to get past, in his mind, they have to get past Scurry to get there. He never thought they could get around him, and they got lucky because of Chavez. But just before Shivington got to the top of the slope, it was about 11 o'clock in the morning, Scurry's troops and Slough's men are going to bump into each other again at Glorieta Pass, that narrow gorge with those steep mountain slopes on both sides, with no real room for either army to maneuver their men.
It kind of reminds me of Thermopylae, the Spartan battle, which was in that narrow pass.
It was very similar like that. It was a Union soldier said, quote, "It was a terrible place for an engagement." Slough had did his best, though. He set up a battle line with 2 guns on the northern slope of the pass. Scurry's going to respond by putting his men into battle lines of his own. Now, once the Battle of Glorieta Pass resumed, on the second day of the battle, 3rd day on the calendar, Slough realized that he was outnumbered, and the Federals had to fall back 800 yards when he saw his left flank was about to be turned, and he's going to reset his line. And this must have been really hard because, like you said before, they're in these really tight quarters, and they had to try to move all their men around. Scurry's mounted rifles, don't forget, these guys are on horses too. Scurry's mounted rifles charged the Union line, and soon the men were in each other's faces with the swords clanking and hand-to-hand combat just in this small little pass.
I got to think it's kind of like Westwood's and Antietam as well.
A little bit.
That, yeah.
A little bit. I mean, it's kind of like that. It's like fighting on a subway.
Yeah.
It really was. Scurry is going to basically flank Slough for the second time, in which the Union is going to fall back a second time to a place called Pigeon Ranch. This battle went on for 6 straight hours, and by 5 p.m. in the afternoon, both sides were completely exhausted to the point that Scurry actually called a timeout. He requested a temporary truce from Slough to collect his dead and wounded men.
Do you know what other battle they did that at? The Battle of Kennesaw Mountain?
It happened quite a bit. Yeah. But this is right in the middle. They said, okay, halftime, let's take a break. This was all happening while Scurry had no idea that Shivington, that flanking column of 400 men, was 16 miles away behind him at his rebel headquarters at Johnson's Ranch, ready to spring phase 2 of the Union attack. So while Scurry and Slough were on their truce, Shivington, with his 490 men, are staring down at the supply wagons when Shivington gives the order to go take them. Now, they couldn't run down the slope. They had to use ropes to climb down. That's how steep these things were.
Wow. And
when they did get to the bottom, they charged directly at the 85 supply wagons at Johnson's Ranch. Those sick and wounded Texans, guarding them, they saw Shivington's men. See you later. They ran like hell, like the Cowboys in January, right? And this allows the Federals to bag the entire supply train without barely firing a shot. Shivington then puts all 85 wagons into a big circle and lights them on fire, destroying all of Scurry's supplies.
He's such a psycho.
You know what else he does? He orders all 500 horses and mules to be bayoneted. So he kills all of them.
Oh my, he really is.
So
this guy.
Oh, this guy's a real fun.
I mean,
but that's what he does. So he slaughters all 500 horses and mules that had been pulling the wagons. So Scurry, 16 miles away at Glorieta Pass, he probably either saw the smoke or he got word that his supply wagons were up in smoke. And this is during the timeout, during the truce. You know what he does? He sneaks his men away during the truce. So he leaves his wounded to the mercy of the Union Army. He finds out his supply wagons are burning during their truce, and he says, "Hey, everybody, let's get the hell out of here." And they go back down Glorieta Pass, down the Apache Trail, the Santa Fe Trail to the canyon, and he orders his men to fall all the way back to Santa Fe. Again, without supplies in this barren area of New Mexico, the Rebs were completely screwed here, and he knew this battle and this campaign are over. So back at Johnson Ranch, Shivington doesn't bother to chase the sickened Texans. He just lets them go, and he returns to his camp at Kozlowski's Ranch, and they're going to meet up with Slough's main column again. They both didn't realize the battle was over at that point. Once Canby, The boss hears of the Union retreat. He orders Slough's entire army to return all the way to Fort Union, fearing the Rebs are going to try to get around and attack the fort. Scurry, he's like, Scurry's got no supplies. He has no chance of attacking us. That the odds of the rebels attacking Fort Union were as great as Aaron Judge coming through in the clutch at this point.
He struck out 4 times yesterday.
He did, right? But Slough, he wants to go and fight them. He wants to finish the job. Canby says no, so Slough loses his mind. Absolutely loses it. He's so angry with Canby's decision, he actually quits on the spot. Resigns his commission on the spot because he knew what a huge mistake it was. Regardless, Sibley's plan to attack Fort Union, gain the supplies, and proceed to California and Colorado was over.
To get gold and to open the blockade.
It was over. So casualties for the Union at Glorieta Pass were only about 150 guys.
Yep.
For the Confederates, it was a little more, around 220. But regardless, Canby and his reinforcements from Slough were able to deny Sibley's Confederates from marching north for the rest of the war. And for that reason, the Battle of Glorieta Pass is sometimes called what?
The Gettysburg of the West.
Gettysburg of the West. And that's why you hear
Were
that.
Were there beavers there?
I don't know. Probably not. But basically, that's what... So because they stopped them from... Because they never went back. That was their one and only chance.
Yep.
4 days after the battle on April 1st of 1862, Canby gets promoted to brigadier general. He'll leave Fort Union for Albuquerque, where he'd get into a small skirmish artillery battle, again, with some of Scurry's men. Nothing substantial, but these bumped into him a little bit. Sibley had no choice but to retreat all the way back to Texas, with no supplies and no chance of living off the land. He'll begin a very long and difficult trek back on April 2nd, 1862. He had a 10-day march ahead of him with only 6 days' worth of rations. That's all he had. Moving south along the Rio Grande, Sibley realized that he's being pursued by a portion of Canby's army, and they skirmished around the town of Peralta, New Mexico. But the armies were on opposite sides of the Rio Grande, so Canby all he could really kind of do was shadow him. Sibley's march was pure hell, and similar to that of John Bell Hood's retreat from Nashville later in 1864, very similar. With little food or water, Sibley's men marched through a desert in the sun, and some men basically were forced to pull artillery wagons by hand, since Shivington slaughtered the horses and mules. So the guns they did bring, they had to pull, they had to carry. Just imagine. Morale was low. It was basically every man for himself at that point. And just when you think things could not get worse for Sibley and his men, the Apaches start attacking them.
Oh, this whole thing.
The Apaches start to follow them and attack their rear, picking off Sibley's men as they tried to keep up with the column. So as Sibley's men fell back, the Apaches grabbed them. Locals said they found bleached Confederate skeletons along the Sibley's retreat path for over a year after the battle from the Apaches.
That's so gross.
Right? When the men that he had left, Sibley made it back to Fort Bliss in Texas in early May of 1862. He lost over 1,700 men in the campaign, most during the retreat back to Texas.
Yep.
Sibley wrote Richmond with the results of the campaign. He wrote to Davis, quote, "Except for its political, geographical position, the territory of New Mexico is not worth a quarter of the blood and treasure expended in its conquest." So on May 14th, 1862, Sibley's going to gather the survivors of the campaign at Fort Bliss. He's going to thank them for their efforts, and then he's going to continue his march back to San Antonio, probably regretting the missed opportunity he had of the gold and the silver. He has to have. When he gets back to San Antonio, Sibley got some minor commands in Louisiana, a little bit later.
Yeah.
But his alcoholism continued to haunt him, which caused more problems when his Civil War was over. That was pretty much end. He got court-martialed and censored in 1863 for basically being a drunk in Louisiana. After the war in 1869 to 1873, Sibley was recruited by Thaddeus Mott to serve in Egypt as a military advisor to the Khedive of Egypt, Ismail Pasha. But in 1873, Sibley was removed from this position, again due to alcoholism. So he eventually had to return to the United States to move in with his daughter Helen in Fredericksburg, Virginia. His greatest accomplishment, the Sibley tent, That even blew up in his face.
Oh my God.
Because he had tried for years to get a patent for his tents, and he had to wait his entire life for payment for it, and it never came. So Sibley dies in poverty in Fredericksburg, Virginia on August 23rd, 1886, at the age of 70, and is buried in the Confederate cemetery in town not far from Maurice Heights. His friend and Glorieta Pass nemesis, Edward Canby, also had a difficult post-Civil War life. This war was like the bad luck thing. It just was this battle, right? Canby moves to Washington after the battle and became an adjutant general and was the man who led the U.S. troops in the New York City draft riots in July of 63.
I remember that name now.
Right?
Yeah.
Canby was promoted to Major General in 1864 and became commander of the Military Division of Western Mississippi, where he accepted the surrender of Richard Taylor on May 4th, 1865, and Edmund Kirby Smith, May 26th, right? When the war ended, Canby became commander of Department of Columbia out west in Northern California, where the girls are warm, right? In March of 1869 by President Grant, where he had to deal with the Modoc Indians who were attacking settlers in California and Oregon. On April 11th, 1873, a peace parley with the Modoc in Tule Lake, California, with their Indian chief, Captain Jack was his name. Despite what Billy Joel wrote, Captain Jack did not get him high tonight. He actually Captain Jack shot Canby twice in the head and slit his throat during the peace parley.
Wow.
For this, Captain Jack was arrested and he was eventually hanged. Canby's funeral was attended by William Sherman, Philip Sheridan, Lew Wallace, and Irvin McDowell on May 23rd, 1873 in Indianapolis, Indiana. In the end, for Sibley, just his campaign was nothing except misery and loss. And thanks to Canby, Slough, and Sivington at the Battle of Glorieta Pass, this stopped the Confederacy from ever invading that territory ever again. You know, though it ended Jefferson Davis's dream for more land for slavery and control of the gold and silver mines in the West, Glorieta Pass captures the imagination of Civil War buffs to this day because it's one of those great what-ifs in history.
It is, and I was reading when I was doing my research for this. So it is considered, because there's a rating system that goes into battles, which I guess it is what it is, but it is a priority 1 or a class A. And Class A battlefields are principal strategic operations having a direct impact on the course of the war. So Glorieta Pass has this level, which I think it deserves. But other battles that have this level are Gettysburg and Antietam. Mm-hmm. So it is up there with that. And when you look at what they were after with Glorieta Pass, with not just the gold, but being able to get to California and avoid the blockade, even though that would have been, I think, really fucking complicated for them. I think that's why it is an important one to study, that it deserves that rating, that it's up there with Gettysburg and Antietam.
Well, if the Confederates had got there, okay, and again, if you mentioned the ports, that would have forced the Union troops to defend that. They would have sent Navy out west. They would have had to send Army out west to do it. But it's the gold and the silver. I mean, again, movies like National Treasure 2 were about what if the Confederacy got gold. And this is all because of the legend that Glorieta Pass kind of talks about. Yeah, it was a little bit different, but it was about what happens if they seize the gold in the West. And a lot of that, the popular imagery of the like that movie specifically, it comes from the concept of Glorieta Pass, about what happens. And again, it's called Gettysburg of the West because it stops them. But you're right. It's an important battle because if he pulled that off, especially if he got the ports and got the gold fields in Colorado and silver fields in California too, that changes everything. Financially, it changes everything for ports. And it probably changes more troops in the East. Now Lincoln's got to send them west to deal with these guys, weakening the West. Who knows what happens? So you can see how important it could have been. But again, it's a 3,000-man combined battle. It sounds like it should be a lot more. So it's a small battle with gigantic consequences. Kind of like those good things come in small packages type thing.
Well, I think that's the thing that we've realized in the 6 years we've been doing this podcast, is that some of these smaller battles have a huge impact on the larger battles or the Civil War as a whole. And, Glorieta Pass is not the battlefield today. It is one of the threatened. It is endangered because of where it is. So it could disappear at some point, which is very, very sad. But it's also it's up there with Gettysburg and Antietam for its importance. And even though it doesn't have the same amount of people or kind of the kind of the sexy figures or whatever that are fighting here, there's not really corps and divisions. It's still something that needs to be studied.
Right. It's got a lot of people in it. Guys like Shivington, for example, who they're so colorful and they have such a unique and dark history that as you read about these people, you wonder how they're not a little more well known. And there's a lot of people like that. And there's a lot of people just waiting to be discovered in this crazy Civil War. So, Glorieta Pass is a great one to study. I'm glad we finally did this one. But again, I think it tells a story of ideas that the Confederates had to expand their territory and expand their chances, especially early in the war. This is not 1864. This is 61. Yep. How that could change the entire trajectory of the Civil War if Sibley had done it. He almost pulled it off. If he would have gotten Fort Craig and got the supplies, if Canby didn't hold out such a defense at Valverde and he was able to get to Fort Union, who knows how history could be different today. And and people don't like the what if thing, but this is one that really matters.
It is. And I think that's important to study. Again, to study these smaller battles, to get away from the Gettysburgs and I'm going to say the Chickamaugas, because I am very Western, not this Western theater, but Western theater focused, the bigger battles, and realize that some of these smaller battles, it's kind of like Monocacy. The effect that small battle has on the Civil War as well in 1864. But this is one early in the Civil War that had the Confederates won, would have had huge consequences.
It would have been, Monocacy was kind of I don't want to say a Hail Mary, but it was late in the war. This one would have been a foundational battle and set up an entire port, a couple of ports in California, and it would have probably changed the entire trajectory of the war.
It would have.
And the Western theater would not have been Tennessee and Georgia.
No, it would
Tennessee
have been. Could you imagine, Vicksburg might not have happened. Who knows what would have happened with Shiloh, because this is apparently falling under their Class A battlefields, strategic operations.
Certainly is.
That they have.
Is. So I think we can drop it here and just understand this. This is a great one to study. It's a lot of fun to research this one. There's some colorful characters in it, but it's an important battle, and I'm glad we finally did it. We finally did a real Western theater episode.
We did.
We finally did. So what's coming up for us next?
So next we are going to be doing an episode about Shiloh. We are going to be looking at Lew Wallace at Shiloh, which you and I are both Team Wallace, so it'll be interesting to see how that episode goes. And then kind of just not coming up soon, but we are also going to be doing an episode about the election of 1880.
Yeah, that's on the back burner. We got a lot of stuff to talk about with this, but that's going to be a good one too.
And also Lily's Battery, Lily's Battery from Chickamauga.
Eli Lilly, yeah.
And we are going to be heading to Harper's Ferry to talk about the rest of the story of John Brown as well at some point.
A lot of good stuff coming down the pike, so watch this spot. So all right, so any final words from you there, Finchero?
Thank you for bringing it like you always do. Thank you to our listeners, and also thank you to our partner tonight, Mosby, who sat with us for part of this recording.
He certainly did. We appreciate it. And so definitely, and thanks to Todd for the beer. We appreciate that. It was great to see him last week, and great to see people that we know from the podcast. So, and also, by the way, before we jump off, we got to thank everybody who came out to see us at Gettysburg last week, or a week and a half ago now. We did an episode of the Irish Brigade in front of a pretty good population there, good audience. At the great Gettysburg.
Thank you for the beer that we got from, I believe it was David, our listener. So
good
thank
stuff,
you.
Good stuff. But Gettysburg is great. Great friends of the podcast, so go check them out. We always appreciate their support. Okay. So that's going to do it for us. We appreciate it. Have a great weekend. Hopefully it stays safe. Mary, I hope your Indians they're undefeated so far. They're 1-0. They're taking the world by storm. We'll see how it is.
The drought is over.
This could be the year. All right, off we go. Everyone, a great night. We'll talk to you all soon on the other side.
See y'all later.
Peace out.
Bye.